Welcome to Mountain Murder Mayhem. Katoomba has a long and rather shady history and a terrible reputation for being a place where there has been a lot of murders. Now, I decided to test this out, so I went scouring through the old papers to see what I could find. Oh boy, did I find. And I'm going to bring you all along for 3 tasty little stories, plus a couple of bonus ones in this video. So, we're going to start at the most recent and work our way backwards, because the best story is really old. But behind me is what is known as Shell Corner. Shell Corner, until the highway was redeveloped, was a notorious traffic black spot. Really nasty. It's called Shell Corner because between Bathurst Road and the railway was a Shell fuel depot. But behind me, and we are going to use the euphemism Bates Motel to protect the innocent. Behind me is Bates Motel. And in 1990, Rodney Francis Cameron, better known in Australia as the Lonely Hearts Killer, one of the most notorious serial killers this country has ever produced, murdered the woman Maria Goldner in one of the rooms. Now, as if that wasn't bad enough, Rodney Francis Cameron had a long and disturbing history in Katoomba. As a 19-year-old in 1974, when he was a trainee in a trainee nurse in an aged care facility, he committed his first murder. He raped and murdered Miss Florence Edith Jackson, who was a nurse, in her home. When on the run for this murder, he then murdered Francisco Ciberto, who had picked him up while he was hitchhiking along between New South Wales and Victoria. He murdered him, dumped his body, and stole the car. While he was on the run for these 2 murders, he also murdered an elderly war widow, Sarah Mackenzie, from Milson's Point. He wasn't convicted of this murder until much later. Cameron was jailed for 9 years for the murder of Miss Jackson. Upon his release in 1983, he was extradited to Victoria and jailed for Mr. Ciberto's murder. He was then released after 7 years in 1990, where he had met and then brought Miss Goldner to Katoomba and murdered her. Cameron was again convicted of this murder and is currently serving a life sentence. Me a little bit further into town now is St Hilda's Church. Now, in 1959, John Reynolds killed his wife, Stella Catherine Reynolds in the hall of in the kitchen of the hall of St Hilda's Church, while 300 people were sitting in the hall listening to the final sermon from Billy Graham's crusade in Sydney. So they were listening to a live cast. He murdered his wife, stabbed her sister, who was called Patricia Jocelyn Holcroft, and injured another woman, Ethel Gifford. He did this in front of their 18-month-old son, and apparently this murder was inspired because his wife had been seen with a new Australian. Now for the goodie. Behind me is what was the California. The California was one of the big swanky hotels. It's very old, very distinctive, and has one of the most beautiful views in all the mountains. Now, in 1917, way back in time, way back in the First World War, George King, a commercial traveller from Melbourne, was staying at this hotel. George King used to stay frequently at the California. He was well known. He was well known as a great flirt with the ladies. And he also wore a large diamond signet ring. Now, this diamond signet ring was to catch the eye one evening over dinner of a Mr. Keith Shaw. Keith Shaw was a young man who was visiting Katoomba with his brother, Lionel. Lionel. With his brother, Lionel. Lionel and Keith were identical twins. Supposedly very, very attractive young men. Keith, however, from the evidence, appears to have had some level of cognitive impairment, based on the evidence that you can surmise from the newspaper reports. Keith sees Mr. King's ring. He decides he wants it. Mr. King goes out after dinner. He's been flirting with waitresses. He's a very affable man. And Keith goes out as well. Lionel stays in the hotel. He has barely noticed Mr. King. He has no interest, but Keith has become obsessed. He hangs about town until 3 a.m. Lionel has gone to bed. He has left a lamp on because they're sharing a room for when Keith comes back. Keith doesn't come back to the hotel till 3 a.m. when, armed with a hammer, he goes to George King's room and batters him about the head and body, stealing few pounds in notes and the ring. He's absolutely covered in blood. The screams of Mr. George King as he's being attacked wake the entire hotel, including Lionel, who then finds Keith returning to their room. Not that long later, he had escaped out the window, but he hasn't gone very far. And he returns to the room covered in blood. This is not a really organised crime. This is a really disordered crime. It doesn't even occur to him to wash the blood off. Lionel notice it, like Lionel sees this, he's seen what's happened, he's put two and two together. This is not good. The next morning, the authorities are called. They are told not to leave the establishment. Keith leaves the hotel and he goes out and hires a car to take him round the sites. When he's asked later why he did this, he said it would be his last chance to do so. Mr. King dies later that day from injuries sustained, and both young men are arrested. Now, witnesses say that Keith and Lionel sang in the cells, that Lionel sang to Keith to keep him calm. This went to trial. This happened in April, and by June, this had gone to trial. Lionel is acquitted of all charges, and Keith, who has basically, he killed him. He made no attempt to cover it up. He'd hidden the money and the ring under a stone, which he had then near the gates, which he then retrieved, is hanged in spite of the fact that he quite possibly was mentally impaired. So that one. As a little coda to that, people who have worked up at the old California, it's not called the California anymore, people who have worked up in the California say that there is a ghost, and that the California ghost is very fond of ladies. In fact, if you stay in George King's old room, it is said that George King will feel you up if you're a lady. He was a ladies' man. Finally, as a little coda to this macabre trio of stories, we are down at Echo Point. Now you're wondering why we are at Echo Point. Well, Kylie Tennant, when she lived out at Blackheath, described where she lived as Murder Mountain. Cars would come racing out along her road, of which she was like the last house. Nothing out there but cliffs and bush. We go racing out there and return very quickly. She presumed that Sydney was, as usual, using the mountains as a very convenient place to dump bodies. Well, Murder Mountain may have been a nice secluded place to dump bodies, but behind me is Echo Point. Echo Point is one of our most famous tourist attractions, and yet some people have decided that this is their ideal place to dump a body. In 2010, the body of Margaret Hill was found in bushland near Echo Point by a hiker. Her husband was then later charged for the murder. In 2008, the body of a 38-year-old woman and her daughter were found beneath Echo Point. Her alleged killer was her husband, who brought both his own children on the drive and sent them out bushwalking while he disposed of the bodies off the lookout. In 1971, the body of a woman was found in a Volkswagen sedan parked at Echo Point. The body of a man was later found at the foot of the cliffs. And in 1961, James Campbell murdered his wife, dismembered her body in their bathroom, and then threw the pieces over Echo Point. My. Very, very, very lazy. You do realise at the bottom of Echo Point is Federal Pass. very popular bushwalk. Just saying. So, these and many other stories like them can be found in the archives. Next week, I'll show you how I found them.